It's my great pleasure to introduce, I'll try not to say Gret, which is Australian. Gret?
Yeah.
Gret?
Yeah.
Introduce Gret. We have weekly, fortnightly meetings because we have joint PhD students. So it's so fantastic to have her here in 3D. I don't have a detailed bio in front of me in terms of where you studied or all that kind of stuff. She's amazing. There's a podcast interview that I encourage you to listen if you're very interested in Gret's background and upbringing. In fact, Alison's also been interviewed, and I've been interviewed on this fantastic podcast series called Subject To. So I recommend you Google that, Subject To interviews. You'll learn all about Gret's background and what motivated her to do what she does and what she does now. But she's part of Optima in the sense that we have joint PhD students. Where's Kelvin?
I saw him.
Kelvin's around. Kelvin's our joint student, and we also have Robin at the other end in KU Leuven as well. So welcome to Optima. And here he is. Here's Kelvin.
Sorry.
And we're very much looking forward to learning, because Gret and her team at KU Leuven have enormous experience in rostering. And if you ever go there, you have the opportunity to go there, and they give you a walk through their area and see all their industry partners that they work with and all the amazing rostering and optimization applications that they're working on. It's very inspiring. So looking forward to hearing all about her expertise in personal rostering.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you and Alison for your hospitality and for the opportunity for me to explain personnel rostering to you. So I understand that our backgrounds may differ a little bit, so if I am saying strange things, just do this and I will skip or explain a bit better. To begin with, this is Belgium. It's much smaller than the state of Victoria. I checked it. We have 30,000 square kilometers in Belgium, and I believe it's over 200 in the state of Victoria. Extremely small, but more densely populated. We have 500 people per square kilometer, and I don't know, 60, 80 or so much smaller. We are a federal state, and so this is Flanders, and Flanders is responsible for education in the Flemish-speaking part of our country. So you have to map this onto the top of our country. So if you look at this, you will see all the places in Belgium where KU Leuven has a campus. So my former rector used to say it's like Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's no longer only in Kentucky. KU Leuven is not only in Leuven anymore. So we have campuses everywhere, sometimes with a different focus. This is a bachelor campus which covers many of the subjects and so spread across the country. And I am proud to say that my university is 600 years old. You can see that the key, the original key. I mean, the details are a bit different than 600 years, but we are celebrating the university's birthday. Here is a view from the top of one of our buildings. I'm afraid we don't have high buildings as you have here. A top view of the campus in winter. So the trees have no leaves. And it's a nice campus, small campus in the city center of Ghent. So you can see here the old medieval skyline of my city. And some people are interested in this. So our campus also has biochemistry research, and they are researching things about beer. Kelvin remembers, yes, probably. So if you're interested in chocolates or in beer, you will find everything there. So my talk is going to be serious, but if you want to visit, Kate already told me you will find amazing things to see in Ghent. This painting by the brothers Van Eyck, Jan van Eyck, Flemish primitives, you can't believe what you're seeing. So this is only one part of the painting. It's unbelievably beautiful and detailed. City center of Ghent, a castle more than 1,000 years old. It has been rebuilt a couple of times after it was destroyed, or parts were destroyed, but it's interesting to see all in the city center within 10 minutes walking distance. And then you could also visit Leuven, which is our alma mater, with an impressive town hall, World Heritage all over. You could go to Bruges, where we also have a campus. So I hope, talk to Charlotte, she has seen a bit of our country, and Kate as well. So I hope you will all visit us at some point, and I will show you around. Now the serious stuff. I will talk about personnel scheduling, and I assume that you do not know much. If it's all known, just tell me. So when we talk about personnel scheduling, we could think about many different things. We can think about manpower planning. For example, we are establishing a new hospital. How many people will we need? It depends on how many patients or what kind of treatments we will offer. So the long-term decisions to be made, how will we compose our staff? So this is manpower planning. We then have staffing. When we have the manpower planning, we need to hire people. So you will probably need some seniors, people with experience in this and that. So you will try to hire them. And after hiring, when they are there, you have to decide who is going to work when, who is going to do the early shift tomorrow. And it's only this part I will focus on today. But it's important to understand these hierarchical dependencies in personnel rostering, because we can only schedule the people to work if they are there, if they have been hired for the job. We also have operational dependencies. Sometimes personnel rostering requires people to go to visit places, service technicians, home care nurses. So we need to incorporate some time for them to visit the customers or the patients. Crew scheduling, you need to compose a group that goes together somewhere and they want to come back at some point to their homes. I will talk a bit about driver scheduling, and I'm proud to refer to this over 20-year-old paper by Andreas Ernst, who is here at...
Is he online? Is Andreas online?
He is. Hi,
I am
Andreas.
online, but pretty casual.
Yeah, I can only see your name. Yeah, he's online. So this is a fantastic paper. For those who want to get into personnel rostering, read this. It's not new, but it's an extremely good paper. I like it a lot. Let me go into the hierarchy of personnel rostering. So I talked about the projection of demand, people we will need in the future. And this leads to manpower planning, because we have to be aware of the fact that humans may retire, they may quit the job, some juniors may enter. You don't want only juniors, you want a bit of a mix. And maybe you predict that this year you will need more people in each of the profiles than you had last year. You expect a growth. And then how will you arrive at this objective? You need more people in every skill type or profile. Will you redirect them within the company? Will you hire new people and so on? That's manpower planning. Very interesting subject for statisticians and so on. I talked about staffing. So who of these people will do the jobs in which department? In a university, it's a bit different because you cannot assign a mathematician to psychology, or maybe you could, but usually the mathematicians go in the mathematical department and so on. But in hospitals, you have general nurses with some skills. You can decide to put them in the department that needs them most. And then the rostering happens here. Here we say who is going to work when. And this is the difficulty, because this comes at the end, and this is very impactful for people to know, do I have to work early shifts or weekend or whatever? And it depends so much on what we've decided beforehand. But the decisions are conducted sequentially because they cover a completely different time horizon, and we can potentially end up with terrible rosters for the people here to work, while these decisions were made sensibly. So a problem here is that we usually do not provide feedback to the higher levels. And for example, it is rather popular in nursing environments that people do part-time jobs so that they can combine small children and so on. So they want to work half-time, but many nurses prefer to work, for example, 3 full days and then have 4 days off in a week, rather than coming into the hospital every day for 4 hours, which makes sense for them. But for the hospital, it would be much more comfortable to have them every day for 4 hours, because then they can cover the demand much better. So lots of things you wouldn't think about. And most people, apart from Andreas, I guess, haven't thought about it when they start doing nurse rostering. So here are a few interesting papers. I can leave the presentation behind if you want to join us in personnel rostering. You can read about people who studied sequential scheduling. So first staffing, then rostering, manpower planning, then staffing. Some people do it in an integrated way, which is a bit challenging, because staffing covers a long horizon. So I will not move people from one department to another all the time. When you're assigned to a department, you prefer to stay. But rostering is something which we repeat every month or every 2 weeks. So the time horizon makes it challenging, especially for hospital scheduling. These 2 papers apply to workforce in ground workers in airlines. I cannot say the word for now, but okay. So which is maybe a little bit less sensitive to big deviations than hospital scheduling. And we have papers where people assume, where the researchers assume that the staff is available. So they work for 1 year, they have a contract, and you can decide when to assign them or not. But also some other papers which allow to hire people from outside if you have shortages. It's uncommon in my country to do that, but some other countries do. Staff allocation, and here sequential scheduling, but giving feedback to the other layers to say, okay, it would be comfortable to hire a few part-time nurses who have these skills, or if you can replace somebody who retires with a different profile and so on. So this is basically theory about the whole hierarchy of personnel rostering. And when it comes to personnel rostering, some people focus on shift design. For example, Nizret Muslio, you are working with, he has done a lot of work on shift design. Which shifts do we need? Do we need 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 8 to 5, but with a long break in the middle and so on? So shift design so as to cover the demand during the day. We are not doing that. So my group is more specialist in shift-based demand. We assume we know which shifts we need to cover, and then we have to assign them to people. So terminology is all over the place. Again, Andreas did some work here, and we have a few other reviews, especially focused on nurses. Andreas' review is more general, and this is, it's not me, it's a synonym, it's not me. It's a literature review where a rather junior person covered whatever he found in the literature regarding nurse rostering, and explains what is going on. This is the first definition I'm showing you, and I regret it's not mathematical or not formal. So it's a definition in words, and I took these pictures, I think, almost 20 years ago, so you can tell by the infrastructure, the computer. Back then, most people were doing their rosters like this. So they discussed, crossed out some things and tried to arrange things. So 20 years ago is when many of the publications I showed you were already around, but they were not using them. So I have to disappoint you when I say that still today, many people schedule manually. And I hope to be able to explain you today why that is. Not necessarily because it's difficult, but all right. So I do not expect you to really read the definition. I will say it briefly. We have shifts to cover, we have people, fixed number of people, fixed number of shifts to cover, and we will decide who is going to do what. And the difficulty in personnel rostering is, of course, that people need a rest from time to time. So we cannot schedule people like we would schedule machines. Machines only need to rest when there's maintenance. People is a little bit different. And here is an example of a very simple personnel roster. So we have 5 people, 1 week. And we can see that some of them are doing early, late, and night shifts, and sometimes they have a break. So I don't know if you notice any strange things in this roster. I can help you. We need 6 people on Monday and we only have 5. So somebody will have to do 2 shifts in a row, which is theoretically unacceptable, but in practice, these things happen. There are a few other problems. So I wouldn't like to be this person, night shift, jet lag, and then night shift again. It's terrible. And then after the night shift, a little bit of rest, and in the afternoon, they have to come back. So night shift, I put the night shift on Wednesday, but you realize that the night shift ends on Thursday morning. So it's not a very good schedule, but if you need all these people to work, I would like you to look at it and see if you can find a better one. You can find a better one, trust me, but okay. Let me begin by explaining a little bit of theory, and I'm not going to explain anything in a chronological order. So the first thing I will explain is actually a very recent result one of my PhD students established a couple of months ago. So he started working on the days off scheduling problem. So people work or do not work. So we are not talking about the complicated definition I gave. And so let's assume a number of nurses. We have 3. Let's assume 1 week, 7 days, right? Let's assume that the requests per day are given. We know exactly how many people we want to work each day and not. It's given. It must be exactly fulfilled, so we cannot deviate. So, and this is what it looks like, 3 nurses 1 week, and there you see the demand per day. So on Monday, we need 2 people, on Tuesday, 3, and so on. I will now show you a schedule, a roster, and it's feasible, right? Because the only thing we need to do is match the demand. It's a bit strange because the crossed out squares are working squares and the dots are free squares. But I will need your attention because I will give an exercise in a minute. So this is a feasible schedule. Okay, now assume that we have a global upper bound, upper constraint on the number of working days per nurse. And this global constraint is 6. Is my schedule feasible? It's a bit easy. No, it isn't. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. For example, like this, right? Feasible. I will add constraints one by one. Now we have a global bound on the number, on the total number on days off per nurse. It's 4. Is my schedule feasible? Yeah. So the off days or the dots, this person does 4, but that's still exactly acceptable. So that's good. Now we have a local upper bound on the number of working days in a row, the number of consecutive working days. So a nurse here in this simple example is not allowed to work more than 3 days in a row. Is my schedule feasible? No. Can we fix it? Yeah. Yeah, I will fix it for you like this. Okay. Yeah. So far very easy. I will add a few more. We have a local lower bound on the number of consecutive working days. This is true. So we don't want people to come in and go home, and then so we want them to work in sequences. So minimum 2 days in a row. Is it feasible? No. Can we fix it? Yeah, you assume that you can always fix it, but so here we fix it. Okay, all the constraints are satisfied, and finally we have a local upper bound on the number of off days, on days off in a row, maximum 3 days off in a row, feasible? Yeah. And we have a local lower bound on the number of off days in a row. So minimum 1 day off in a row, which is a nonsense constraint, because if you have a day off, it's always one. So feasible still. So here we are. This is recent theory. It seems very simple, but to summarize, so we have global bounds, a global upper bound on working, a global upper bound on days off. So you can see here per nurse. And then we have lower bounds on sequences. So lower and upper bounds on sequences. So that's it. That's all we have in terms of constraints. So I assume you're still with me. Question now is, does there exist a feasible schedule that satisfies all the bounds, all the constraints, if I give you bounds for a problem? Do you think it's easy? Only days on and it's off? I mean, this is not a nice question. I will let you check for yourself. So here I have 4 different rosters, and these are the constraints. So this is an exercise Fabienne Nissen, my PhD student, made. I like it very much. So here are the constraints. Upper bound on working 5 per nurse. Upper bound on days off 3 per nurse. Lower bound on working 3. Lower bound on working in a row, 3 days in a row. Lower bound on working minimum 2 days in a row, maximum 3 days in a row. Upper bound on days off is 3, maximum 3 days in a row. Oh, minimum 1 day, so the last one doesn't matter, really. The question is, which of these rosters is valid? Are they all 4 valid or not? So this is an exercise for you. You may shout if you discover a valid or an invalid schedule.
Not sure, I think the 2 on the left are valid.
These 2 are valid?
Maybe.
Yeah, but you're a mathematician, Kate. Do you agree that you should be able to tell yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Quick to check.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, it should be quick to check whether they are feasible. So that's one.
The top right one isn't satisfying you.
Bottom right one will probably.
This is what?
The top right one, the second to last day, there's supposed to be 2 nurses on it instead of 1. So there's supposed to be 1, there are 2.
You're the first one who discovers this. Congratulations, because it's actually a trap. I deliberately didn't pay much attention to the demand to the coverage. Indeed, so top right is infeasible.
And bottom right's infeasible.
Bottom right is
Three off days.
that's feasible. That's feasible, but we have an upper bound.
Sorry, yeah,
On
too many words.
yeah.
So stand by my claim.
So these 2 are infeasible. Now, are the left 2
The top
feasible?
left one, the second nurse is working 1 day at the end.
Yeah.
And we're not assuming it's working.
Well,
And even if it,
no, but this is an interesting point. It has been a debate among nurse rostering people. So for me, this would be feasible because we can correct it next week. But for many people, it's infeasible. Yeah. So good point. Good point. So here, given that we know what we know, it's infeasible. Agree? This one, is it feasible?
I think so.
Yeah. I agree with you, but I think so. Will
Not very common.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Yeah.
yes.
So it's a yes. Yeah.
Actually, so are we talking about a continuous calendar here, or are we talking about just a 7-day segment?
Yeah, so we are talking here about a 7-day segment, and I disagree with it. But it's what many people have done in personnel rostering. You were actually right to point at the problem here. This is not necessarily a problem if we are aware that we have to correct it the next week. But many people work like this, which bothers me because I have to adjust my algorithm to solve these problems, whereas in reality, when I'm doing it for hospitals, my algorithm assumes that this can be corrected. See, so this is a very valid point, and it's one of the points we discuss a lot when we are having our online meetings. So thank you. Let's continue. So Fabian discovered this, the days on days off scheduling problem. He did not define the problem, he found it. He discovered that it was proven to be NP hard for more than 10 years already in an interesting paper by Jens Brunner and so on. So it's NP hard. But while Fabien was looking at the problem, he found a few things. He said, if we have any global bound, so over the whole period, and a local lower bound, then the problem is NP complete. So he's not as general as the previous claim. So he proved this if only a few of these constraints are given. So he doesn't need all the constraints to prove that it is NP. And then he goes further and he says, if we only have a global upper bound and local upper bounds, then we can decide the problem in linear time in number of days. So no longer NP hard or NP complete. If you have this combination of constraints, you can decide it. If you want to look at it, I can send you the paper. It's not published yet, but he put it in archives. And it's very easy to tell why it is infeasible, a bit like what we were doing a minute ago. It's very easy to tell it's infeasible for this and this reason. And he also showed that if we only have local bounds, so the sequences, then the problem can be decided in quadratic time in terms of the number of days. So he actually says that the proof that was out there for NP hardness does not hold. Okay, you can say this is very theoretical, it doesn't matter, and so on. But I think it's important to also build some theory instead of trying to throw algorithms at some problems if you don't understand that some combinations of constraints may actually make the problem easy or difficult. So I'm very proud of this person. If you visit us, you can meet him. So computational complexity. There existed some work before by Huixin Lao, almost 30 years ago. He proved that when we have coverage constraints, demands, requests, so the vertical things in my example, and if we have days on and days off fixed, but if we have shifts on these days, and if we have constraints on the shift succession, so do not perform a late shift after a night shift, then it's NP hard. He already proved it then. Then Osogami and Ima, also a long time ago, proved that if we have coverage constraints, so the vertical constraints, and if we want to restrict not the number of days worked, but the number of shifts worked, for example, not more than 3 night shifts in a week, not more than 2 early shifts and so on, then it's NP hard. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when we consider days, it's all right. When we go to shifts, then we are in trouble. And here are some references to theoretical work about the complexity of personal rostering. Interesting. Let us look at an example again. So now we go into shifts. We stop the days on, days off. We go into shifts. I have 5 employees. We will see here the number of shifts the whole group performs and the number of days everybody works. And this example was developed by Peter Smet, my postdoc, who's also working in the joint project. So we have here a schedule and we see the coverage. So on Monday, we have 1 late and 1 night person. We don't have an early person and so on. I think you can all interpret it. And suppose that we expect people to work 5 days per week, then we have problems because employee 4 and 5 do not work enough. And we have also problems here because we don't have anyone covering the early shift. We don't have anyone covering the late shift. We have 1 early shift too many, but too many often doesn't matter. And here we do not have anyone covering the night shift. And there's another problem here because somebody who performs late has a very short rest at night because they have to perform early shift in the morning. So this is not the kind of schedule we want. And so the definition becomes a bit richer. We have a period of T days, S shift types, this is new, and a set of N nurses or employees. And this is also new. The coverage, the demand is no longer a number, but it has to be between a lower and an upper number. So everything in between is feasible. You don't want too few people, obviously, but you don't want too many either, even though we pay them on an annual basis or large contracts. But if there are too many, the work will not be done as well, because I think, yeah, so we don't want too many and not too few. Okay, and each nurse has to work exactly AI days in this period. It's again a rather simple example, but this is strange. Each person has a preference for working or not working a particular shift in a day. It's artificial. There exists data sets which exactly explains this problem. I've never seen it in practice, because for me, it depends on what I did yesterday, what my preference for today will be, but fine. It's interesting and fascinating to work on. And I don't know if you're familiar with integer programming models. I know a few of you definitely are. And here is the formulation. Xij says if one nurse works on shift K on day J, 0 otherwise, and then we want to minimize the cost. So this cost or this preference, the things that you don't want have been given a high cost. We want to minimize these costs of people being assigned to certain shifts on certain days. People cannot perform more than one shift per day. The coverage, so the number of people we have on each day must be between the minimum and the maximum, no longer a fixed number. And people work exactly AI days. Okay, so integer programming formulation. What do you think? Do you think it's easy to solve? Should be. It is indeed, Kate, very easy, because it's a network flow problem. So we can drop all the mess of integer programming caused by integer constraints. We can formulate a problem as a network, and it looks like this. So we have, maybe I will go to the full model. I've put all the constraints in here, but I think it works better if I show this. A minimum cost flow network is known to be easy to be solved. And this exactly models the problem I explained to you. So let us look at an example. We have 3 days, and this example only 2 shifts, early and late, 5 nurses. And the coverage requirements are these. On Monday, we need between 2 and 3 people in the early shift, between 1 and 2 in the late shift, and so on. And then the network becomes this. So we have a source and a sink. And here we have all the shifts that need to be covered. And we can put all the constraints on here. So the shifts that we need must be covered, at least the minimum number. And the people must work all 5 days in a week. And here it's a short week, only 3 days. So here they work 2 days out of 3. So we can put all the constraints on here, solve it in very few time. And here is a solution which shows who is working what. So these are the nurses, these are the shifts, the shifts per day, the nurses per day. So, and we can see here the solution. I can explain in more detail how it works, but we used a very simple algorithm to solve it. And for example, for employee 1, we see that they perform an early shift on Monday, a late shift on Wednesday. We didn't have any of these strange constraints, lower local bounds, and the person performs exactly 2 days and it's solved. And this was a fascinating result. So here's for employee 3, the solution. Very fascinating because it showed that some instances from LSP nurse scheduling problem, LIP, which was introduced 20 years ago, that some of these problems were actually solvable, whereas people had published papers where they said, oh, nurse rostering problem is NP-hard, so we need, I disagree with this argument, but okay, so we need all sorts of different algorithms. But here we showed that many of these instances, you can see there the size of the instances, sometimes pretty large, could be solved with Cplex. Back then, we solved it 10 years ago or so with Cplex, or even better with a dedicated network flow library, Lemon, which is incorporated in CoinOR. And the results are interesting. So instead of all the publications about heuristic work, we showed that we could solve them with Cplex, with an IP model, but we could solve them even faster with this linear network flow problem. And I wanted to show you this to indicate that it's not a matter of this algorithm works better than another algorithm on this problem. Some problems need to be looked at, analyzed, and what's the point of throwing complicated algorithms at problems that we can solve with 50-year, or I don't know how old these network flow models are, from previous century. Let's say it like this. So yes.
In that particular example, you've made one of the constraints effectively a soft constraint that allows you to do optimization, which is the nurse preference. But other constraints in there, you could potentially make those soft as well. So you might say, we prefer not to have a late shift followed by an early shift or something like that.
Yes, yes.
So in that particular case, the driver was simply, I mean, that's kind of a natural fit in that case. It was the nurse's preference to work particular shifts. So, but other aspects of the schedule could equally be thought of as a preference rather than hard.
I fully agree with you. I completely agree. All I wanted to show here was an initiative, a good initiative of publishing instances clearly described, what they denote, and then they are still out in the world to be solved. But I fully agree. And maybe this leads to my next question. We had a little bit of theory. Let's go to practice. Let's go to practice and understand how these words are interpreted in practice, or how we interpreted them from practice. So let's first look at time. So we have a scheduling horizon. You already pointed at the difficulty that we don't stop after 1 week. We usually schedule 4 weeks or 2 months in a row. And due to the fact that we work with people, we have to pay attention to the first day of the next period to align with the previous day. So we have a scheduling horizon. Sometimes it's a year, whatever. Some people have cyclic schedules. I don't know what it is like in Australia in terms of nurses. Do they work early shift 1 week, late shift 1 week, like some workers do in manufacturing?
Depends on the department, but ER does do like night shifts, early shifts, late shifts.
But in Rome, 1 week early, 1 week late, 1 week.
Yeah, so normally I think
Okay.
it's horizons of, I think it depended on the shift, but I think.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So the system is different in every country. And then this is also interesting. Here I've put an example with 4 shifts. So far we had 1, 2, 3 in the examples I gave. This is 4, but when I'm talking to hospitals, it's often up to 40 different shift types, because somebody's bus arrives at 10 past the hour. So if they come at 10 past 6, what do they have to do? And then they negotiate with HR that they will come 10 or 15 minutes late every day, and then they make a new shift for this person or for the people coming by bus. Some part-time people work shorter shifts. So and some so you cannot imagine how many different part-time contracts there are. You would think full-time, half-time. No. every percentage we have seen basically. So people can have a 20% occupation, and sometimes they define special shifts for them, which is challenging. Shifts overlap in time. So if you want to translate the coverage to shifts, this is a difficulty. Sometimes we have split shifts. Some people come during the peak hours in the morning, go home, do something else, and then come back during the peak hours of the evening. This is very interesting for the hospital, not so interesting for the people, but if you can arrange them to sign a contract like this, then it's very good. So time is not as simple as I showed in the theoretical examples. Skills. Skills obviously depend on the degrees, the training, experience people have. And we have contracts. I was talking about the full-time, part-time contracts, but we also have dedicated contracts for people who volunteer to do night shifts only. So then they come do a couple of night shifts and have a long period off. Some people do only weekends, voluntarily. Okay, this is helpful. So I think you understand skills and contracts. Sometimes they change over time. So people take some training and their skills change after they obtain a new degree. So then how to evaluate a schedule across the borders, I think you were thinking about it. So if the constraints here are different than the constraints here, and we have to evaluate a monthly schedule, I mean, it's doable mathematically, but it's very different to make something that works mathematically and that you also can explain to them. I can give examples if you want. So contracts change over time. Somebody decides to go part-time after a while. How to evaluate the schedules, how to make the schedules. Very challenging. Coverage. So the number of people we need in every day, every shift, and every skill. You would assume that the minimum coverage is a hard constraint, right? I think you assume this. Maybe you want to. And here is an example of a roster we got. It was made in Excel by a hospital. And the colors here denote violations of these hard constraints, whereas they don't know. So they think they are obeying all the rules, but unconsciously, they do violate because sometimes it's impossible. So here I come to your point. Indeed, sometimes we say, okay, let us relax. Because we cannot solve it. And some other constraints, legal constraints, so minimum rest time between two shifts. We need people to rest at least 11 hours between two shifts. Do you think it's a hard constraint? Legal? It should be, right?
I know here in Australia, it is a hard constraint within the hospital, but not between hospitals.
Oh, okay. Yeah, here in my country, it's legal. It's a law and a working agreement. You have to obey. If hospitals don't, they get huge fines. But sometimes they don't. Yeah. So we often have to model it as a soft constraint, indeed, which is very surprising. Skill downgrading. Do you think that's a hard or a soft constraint? So we need somebody in a certain skill. What do you think? Downgrading in hospitals? If the rector, you don't call them rector, right? If the rector is unavailable to give a lecture, somebody with a lower rank will replace them and so on. So skill downgrading all over. If you talk to them, if you have an interview, they say, no. And it happens all the time. So we have to model all these things often as soft constraints. Then we have some contractual constraints, maximum 6 night shifts per month, for example. They get violated all the time. So do we. Some personal constraints or preferences. You would think personal constraints are the first constraints that we can violate, but that's not true. If I ask a day off to go to the wedding of my nephew and so on, it's very important for me. So very strange when you read that when you read the description as a human, you think, oh, that's easy. Of course, this makes sense. But then when you think a bit further and put yourself in the place of these people, Okay, so if we would model them all as hard constraints, I can tell you few of the realistic problems will be feasible. And here's a figure I took from a paper by Peter Brucker, who worked with some people at the University of Nottingham, and they indicated which constraints are violated and how to evaluate them. So for example, too few consecutive days shifts. So the lower bound on working here is not satisfied and so on. You see the weights here. So many problems with this schedule. It doesn't look too bad on the other hand, but so suppose we have a solution, how to evaluate it, how to determine which one is better than another. And so this is some work we have done a couple of years ago, and we are now going to update it with Robin because we need a fourth one. But I will explain the three groups of constraints. So we have counters, things that we can count. We have a schedule and we count, we make a sum and we see. It's very easy to evaluate this constraint. For example, the total number of working days. And if we don't meet it, we put a penalty and so on. Series are the local bounds, so sequences of consecutive things. I've put it here in a horrible notation, but I hope you understand that this is more difficult to evaluate these sequences. I mean, more difficult, it's not difficult, but you need a bit more computing to be able to evaluate them. And then we have successive series. For example, if you have worked a series of night shifts, then you're allowed to take a sequence of 48 hours off within the next week, not immediately after. So it's a conditional thing. The integer programming people see big M's here, so it's a difficult one to evaluate. And but let's go to practice again. So the counters, to count the number of night shifts somebody worked, to count the number of days somebody worked, the number of weekends off, and so on, is simple. And we can assume that the penalty will be proportional to the violation. So if you are allowed to work 20 days in a month and you work 22, it's not as bad as if you would work 28. Okay, proportional. But then we discovered this. So somebody asked for a ski holiday here, February. My country doesn't have mountains. We have a few hills. So if you want to go for a proper ski holiday, you have to travel. And then this person asks for these days off, but you can see here on Wednesday, the 3rd, we don't have sufficient people to work. I don't know why they are ill or they have a meeting. So the HR or head nurse says, yeah, you can have these days off, but you have to come on Wednesday. So the whole ski holiday is ruined. So if we make it proportional, this person will not be happy, right? Whereas it made sense. I saw you all nodding when I suggested to make it proportional. So some things, although these are easy constraints, have to be modeled in a different way in order to encompass the people's needs. Another one, series. So we model the weekend constraint usually as a series. And this is something I took from the first nurse rostering competition, in which some of the instances had weekends that last 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It doesn't matter because they have to work 7 days a week. So for us, weekends may be Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. Some hospitals respect that Friday is also already impacting the weekend and Monday as well. And the constraint says work full weekends or not, which means that only the combination, the two first combinations would be feasible for this constraint, because on the first one, the person works full weekend. It's an early shift, doesn't matter. Second one doesn't work at all, which is also okay for the constraints. And all these combinations are infeasible. And now, in the first nurse rostering competition, they said either constraint is violated or not, yes or no. Whereas we think that some of the situations are not as bad as others. Like this one, let me see here, early shift on Saturday, so free on Friday, early shift on Saturday, free on Sunday, early shift on Monday, is, in my opinion, worse than early shift on Friday and having a long weekend. I think it's worse. But the penalty for each of these situations is equal. That was the first notion in competition. I don't blame them because it's really difficult if you don't put yourself in the human position to understand how to evaluate it. So we are still struggling with some of these things. And then finally, successive series. So the dependency between something that occurs and then the consequence of it, the big M. Overtime should be compensated within the next 3 months. Do you think you could model it mathematically? Or, so if somebody works overtime, it's all soft constraints, so it can happen. Has to be compensated within the next 3 months. I'm sure you all think, yeah.
Extended payment period a lot.
That's one point. That's one point. So we have to extend or keep in mind that some things have to be, that's one point. And we struggled with this, but then we were confronted with reality, because do we have to start counting from the first minute of overtime? Does the first minute of overtime has to be compensated within 3 months or not? It's silly, but okay, so they have different interpretations. Do we have to start counting from the shift that causes overtime, or the day? We thought the day initially, but maybe not. And then it appeared to be that this was how they did it in this particular hospital. They start counting from the first Monday after the minute that causes overtime. You know why? Because then the administrative person deals with it. So it is always wrong if you do something and if you try to meet their habits. It's always difficult. And then we assumed that we were not allowed to cause additional overtime until the other was compensated, but that was not the case. So yeah, so that's reality, but okay.
Yes, compensation here, does that just mean money?
No, I'm sorry, no, it means free. I'm sorry, I didn't explain it, you're right. So it means that you need to get additional time off. That's a compensation. No, not money, because that would be easy. Yeah. No, sorry, but I didn't explain it. It's a good point. It's a good point. But it also depends on the hospital or the country. If you allow them to be paid, maybe you will end up in a situation where you make people work unacceptably much and so on. So there are rules for everything, but it's a good point. I didn't think about this.
This is kind of a legislative requirement or a contractual requirement?
Contractual, there's some legacy also. So the amount of overtime has to be limited. Some sectors do not allow overtime. Some sectors have people that love overtime because overtime is usually paid much better than regular time. So if you are in a system that plays the game, you can abuse the game. So this is.
So to me, I mean, I would handle that as leave effectively, and then it's if a staff member doesn't want to take their overtime leave or additional leave in the 3 months, that's not necessarily a problem, right? So
Yeah, but we have to schedule them free. That's the problem. We have to.
But with leave, they request when they want that time.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, giving them time off in lieu when they don't want it anyway. We're just going to give you these days. And
yeah, but you could play the rules. I mean, suppose I know that you all want to see a game at Rotlever Arena. I know that you're a big fan of somebody. I am not, because I'm not supporting the Australian tennis players. And I will ask, I would like to have a free afternoon then, because I know you will all ask. And then the head nurse says, we are in trouble. And then, oh, well, I can do the work. Let the others have their free time. So I will buy credit by saying, oh, well, so you can fool the system a bit if you know these things. So this is very difficult, but it's a good point indeed. It would be nice to tell people you may take a day off whenever it suits you best. But yeah, usually nurses are very scarce resources in Belgium, very much. So it doesn't work like this, unfortunately. So shall we? Did you have a question?
Not really.
No, sorry, I thought you were doing this.
No.
So if I'm not boring you, I will go back to theory and I will rush over this a bit. So we try to categorize some of the problems by saying what they did for scheduling with machines, characteristics, and so on, and objectives. You know the scheduling theory, alpha, beta, gamma, classification. Let's try to do it for personnel rostering. We did it a while ago together with Patrick de Koosmaker, because we wanted people to be aware if they publish a nurse rostering problem that there are so many. So we wanted them to map to the correct problems and to compare against the correct things. It worked to some extent. If I would do it all over now, I would probably do it in a different way, but okay, we get older and wiser all the time. And then Jeff Kingston from the University of Sydney, I don't know if you know him, he attends all the timetabling conferences, Patat. He has done an effort to shape the educational timetabling problems. And he, after many years of hearing us talk about different problems with the same name, he said, let us do it for nurse rostering as well. But he looked at it from an educational timetabling point of view. So I'm not sure if it's getting picked up because it's a bit complicated. So I did not realize I'd been talking so long, but I will say a few things. So we have seen the theory, we've seen practice, and now let's see if we can model some of these real constraints into a theoretical model. So suppose that we have days which are pairwise disjoint. For example, if you work on Christmas, you shouldn't work on New Year's Day, and vice versa. This is very easy to model. We just enter this in our network flow, and it's feasible. Very easy. As soon as we have a set of shifts where we say the sequence of these shifts is not allowed in consecutive days, we are in trouble. It was proven to be complex. Okay, so some things we can add without problems, some other things we cannot. So if we have working requirements per shift, so we don't say we need so many people per day, but we need them per shift, we are in trouble because it was proven that it is NP hard a long time ago. But if you say, I don't need to be able to specify it per shift, maybe you can relax your system, then you can solve it with this network flow. So this is maybe something to think about. Then I will quickly show you the Patat Euro Working Group, timetabling, practice and theory of automated timetabling. You can join for free. We send one newsletter per year, so it's not much. You will hopefully not regret it. And this community collects problems, descriptions, benchmarking instances, and so on. So if you want to work on it, please do join for free. And then I will briefly show the timetabling competition. So in 2010, Stefan Haspeslag, together with Patrick de Koosmaker, organized the first international nurse rostering competition. It was won by some people in Greek. And that's where we said, we had to adjust our algorithm because the borders didn't work. So we had to evaluate the constraints in a different way in the beginning and the end, and we didn't like it. So we participated in the competition, but we didn't like to adjust our algorithm. You could say it's not adjusting your algorithm, but believe me, it is. So we published this not as a criticism to this competition, but in general. To say we cannot cut the periods out. Second nurse rostering competition addressed this problem, and they had some continuity, and this was won by Michael Römer and Meluli from Germany. They won the competition. Interesting competition. And here is just an overview of some of the public data sets. And red means hard constraints, green means soft constraints. So they are a bit different. I don't know if you can imagine how different the algorithms must be to be able to solve these problems. So algorithms that can solve these problems cannot solve it. It cannot, they don't work. We don't know how to make this, how to satisfy these constraints and vice versa. So it's simply hard or soft ruins the whole system. And then I don't want to bother you with the algorithmic trends. So in the 70s of previous century, we already had some nice integer programming models. Then we had all sorts of things, a whole zoo of algorithms. And we see now that people are going back to doing it by hand often, because human resources are not machines, I told you. And there is something that may come closer to the artificial intelligence expertise that goes around here. So we were working with a software company who was installing our algorithms in different hospitals, and we received some schedules from them in order for us to be able to extract the weights they had attached to constraints, because they can freely do so. They can say, okay. And the black dots show which weights they use. So you can see here 100 constraints. This is not extraordinary. I've shown you a few of the constraints, but there are many. But you see, many of these constraints have 0 weights. So we assume these are completely unimportant constraints. I guess you would do the same. Some have weights 200, 500, you see. This is how they put the weights. It's a bit strange, right? But okay, they can do it. But when we looked at the number of violations in their schedules, so they had run our algorithm and were satisfied with the schedules, we thought, okay, perhaps those constraints that are violated often are not important to them because they accepted them. And those constraints that are never violated may be very important. It's a very simplistic reasoning. So we use this with a very simple linear regression model. And we said, okay, the green dots are our constraints. Let's recompute it. It was a lot of, we just recomputed the schedules with our, so this is not much work, but then we printed the schedules. So their schedule with their weights versus the schedule with our weights. The data sets were 3 years old back then. And Peter Smet visited them and they said, what do you prefer? Oh, this was the period when this person had a broken leg. So they recognize their schedules. It's unbelievable. So they recognize them, but they usually picked the new ones as the best. So, and we won a medal for this, although it's just regression, which is, I don't know how many years old. So, okay. Weights versus targets. This is also interesting. A visiting PhD student came to work with us, and she continued on this. And she said, some constraints are not satisfiable. You can never meet them. Like in the example I showed, if you need 6 people and you have 5, you know that you will have to accept a violation. So she said, let us redefine the targets because we are confusing our algorithms to find something that doesn't exist. So she set targets for the constraints, so those that were definitely infeasible, and it worked well. Then I have some work on robustness, truck driver scheduling. The truck drivers have to rest. This is very interesting because we considered fairness here. So fairness is also a nightmare. If you want to have fair rosters, first of all, you need to interpret what is fair, and usually have to pay a little price for it, also for robustness. So I'm sorry to rush a bit. So this is truck driver scheduling, in which drivers must sleep, have a little break, and drive, and Lewis do the work. So if they travel long distances, we have to be very careful when to make them rest or sleep. Very intriguing problem. I wanted to talk to some experts here, maybe this week or next week, to see how we can solve it better. And we see now that people want autonomy, so they do not usually like algorithms. They prefer to do it themselves. So if you make people agree on their schedules in a meeting, who is going to pay for this time? So do we organize a meeting? Who's looking at the patients while they discuss? So this is, again, a problem, although I can believe that probably they will be more satisfied if they have a say in it. Finally, I wanted to invite you, the computer scientists here, to participate in the new timetabling competition we have launched. Patient admission scheduling. I don't know if you fancy it, otherwise I will skip it, Calvin, maybe. So we now say we need to assign an admission date to each patient. Some patients have urgent problems. They have to be admitted within a small time window. Some patients have completely non-urgent problems, and you can delay them to the next period. If we admit patients, we must have a room available for them. And we don't want to transfer them from one room to another while they are there. And we want to maximize continuity of care. So we don't want them to see different nurses all the time. Given that we assume 3 shifts per day, they will at least see 3 shifts if they stay a day. And we assume that they will all stay at least 1 day. So we have to assign nurses to rooms in such a way that the number of different nurses a patient meets is minimized. And then we have to assign an operating theater with a capacity to the nurses. So it's dirty computation that we want.
How does it assess? You send in a program, or how does it work?
You send in a program. So initially you send in solutions for the first phase, and then we determine the finalists. We will collect the algorithms, the programs. So there's a whole description. If you go to IHTC, you will find it there. And then we will run your algorithms on the instances. So if you fool us with your solutions, we will notice. And then we will also run it on hidden instances. There's prize money, free attendance to the Euro conference next year in Leeds, a prize, and imperishable glory if you win it. So I would like to end here by just saying, if you like this, there's work to do on the theoretical part. If you like it, because I believe that it has helped us a lot to not discover that the problems are hard, but to discover that some are not hard. So if you can map your problem onto something that is not hard, it's fantastic. There's computational work to do, to develop algorithms, evaluation functions that are efficient, and so on. There's work to do to integrate it with different problems, with patient admission, people going on the roads. And there's work to do in practice, how to capture what humans really want, how to make them satisfied with your results, how to deal with them, because what they say is not what they want. Remember the weights thing. So what they find important in words is different from what they really find important. And I wish to thank all the people I've worked with on personnel rostering. I've worked with more people, but I believe this is the group of people I worked with on personnel rostering, including Kate and Alison, but we still are waiting for the outcome of the first results, right? So thank you very much for being here.